Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I thought we'd be mic'd, so I'm sorry. We have live mics here. Let me just get this turned on. Okay, I'm so glad to see all of you. I know it's been a very long day. It's been an excellent day to be back here at GlobeSec. Thank you so much for your attendance. The title of this panel is Peace on the Korean Peninsula, No Longer Out of Reach. Let me briefly introduce our panelists: Alexei Pushkov, Chairman, Commission on Information Policy, Council of Federation, Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, Moscow. Koichi Ai, Acting Director General, Japan Institute of International Affairs, Tokyo. Gudrun Wacker, Senior Fellow, German Institute for International and Security Affairs, Berlin. I might need some water. And Ian Brzezinski, Senior Fellow, Atlantic Council, Washington, D.C. And finally, Tong Zhao, Fellow Nuclear Policy Program, Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy in Beijing. So, thank you. So my name is Teresa Fallon. I'm with the Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies based in Brussels, and I'm delighted to be here today. So in the run-up to the first ever summit of the leaders of North Korea and United States, we have moved from the brink of war to apparent rapprochement between the South and North. So since Donald Trump was elected, news has been coming out at us fast. History seems like it's speeding up. As Seth Meyers put it yesterday, the last 48 hours alone have felt something like standing in front of a tennis machine without a racket. So we've had China, North Korea, Michael Cohen, Don Jr., porn stars, collusion, Russia investigation, royal wedding, pause, and Giuliani. So I'll add a few more. ZTE. Did China just bribe Trump to undermine national security? That was on the New York Times today. Tariffs, trade talks with China. And then did you hear about Yanni or Laurel? So everything seems to be happening at such a rapid space, a truly head-spinning 48 hours. In addition to that, we have to sort through the extreme makeover of Kim Jong-un, from dictator to diplomat. He is incredibly virtuous, has incredible virtuosity. I think I would like to know which school he studied at in Switzerland and send my kids there. Kim Jong-un went from pariah to Mr. Popularity, and he didn't even do it by compromising his nuclear program. So we've seen one of the most impressive makeovers. Donald Trump called him Little Rocket Man, you might recall, and in a very short period of time, he became a very honorable man, according to President Trump. So how did he do this? He had leverage to turn a diplomatic corner because he had nuclear leverage. He turned on the charm with his army of beauties at the Olympics, and he left the Hermit Kingdom the first time since he became a leader. So he took this low train to Beijing, and then we saw him fly to Dalian. He had a pop group in Pyongyang, K-pop group perform, and he's very good at the art of the tease. So he's really a master of modern social media as well from that point of view. So I think Trump might have met his match. Kim can sell the drama. He refrains from nuclear tests. He had a historic stroll with President Moon and called for the age of peace and history. And it was the first time ever that we saw the leader of North Korea cross the border to South Korea. I was at a conference about 2 weeks ago, and right after it happened, there was kind of a funny video online, and it showed, it took the real footage, and then once they went back to North Korea together, the earth opened up and swallowed President Moon. And I just thought it was kind of funny, so I showed the man sitting next to me. So it was under Chatham House rule, but he was someone very high-ranked and really understood North Korea negotiations, and he said, "Oh my gosh, is that real?" And I thought, if he really, that just showed the level of distrust, and I felt so embarrassed that I had showed him that. So, to start with our excellent panel, I'm going to throw out the first question to Ian. From today's Wall Street Journal, it says, North Korea is going to be the toughest negotiation of Mr. Trump's life, and he needs Mr. Bolton's counsel to avoid falling for the same false promises that Bill Clinton and George Bush did. But we've seemed to have seen that the White House appears to have thrown Mr. Bolton under the bus. So, talking about the Libya example, so the North Korea issued a statement yesterday saying that North Korea denuclearization, it is completely absurd to dare compare the North Korean nuclear weapon state, they wrote DPRK, a nuclear weapon state, to Libya, which had been at the initial stage of nuclear development. This was from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then this is a second quote, Libya is a cautionary tale. I mean, I don't know. He was ambassador. Ambassador Bolton used the Libya example. It was a sinister move to improve on our dignified state of destiny of Libya or Iraq. So North Korea feels very confident. They have a nuclear weapon, and they don't want to be even compared to Libya, who was kind of early on. And then Marco Rubio chimed in. So I'm curious, Ian, what your views are on this. Is Bolton intentionally sabotaging talks? What about the JCPOA? What was the timing on that? And what is going on?
Thank you, Teresa. I think when you look at your title, Peace on the Peninsula No Longer Out of Reach, I think you have to add, is it? Because I'm not sure it's in reach. When I look at the negotiations going on now, as someone on the other side of the Atlantic, or other side of the Pacific, so to speak, looking at it, I don't see kind of negotiations between a victor and a loser, or two parties in which one sees it as predominant and the other is trying to save itself. So think about it from this perspective. We've had a dramatic set of months that has been in direct contradiction to 70 years of confrontation, if not conflict. We have a bellicose demonstrations of power and vicious tweets to all of a sudden announce a summit and hopes of a new relationship with North Korea. So how do we get there? I think when you think, what I hear from Washington, I see a perspective that gives this story. We applied maximum pressure. We used our military forces to demonstrate our capability. We deployed ballistic missiles. We used tough rhetoric. We convinced the Chinese to swing on board with us. We leveraged economic pressure and sanctions. We're crippling the economy, and so that we forced them to the bargaining table. Okay, may be true, but is that possibly how the other side sees it? And I think the other side probably looks at it this way. We had a great nuclear test, our largest weapon, detonated in September. We followed that up in November with a demonstration of ICBM capability. Over the last couple of years, we snagged a couple hostages and then graciously gave them back. We reached out to the South Koreans and dramatically realigned the PR public relations stage, showed up their Olympics, had this great summit on the 27th. I mean, look at the public opinion change in South Korea. I read it somewhere that trust in North Korea among South Koreans went up from 15% to 67%. That's stunning. And then that's followed, or in the background, you have Trump threatening to withdraw U.S. troops from South Korea last year, and then I think recently is this March. And then Trump responds with a gracious acceptance, uses language almost describing Kim as almost as kind of a Gorbachev-like person. And then in the background, you have this thawing of relations with China. So I think Kim is coming to the table thinking he's very much got the advantage. And so I'm not sure who's really driving events. I'm not convinced it's Trump. I'm a little bit worried it might be Kim, and I'm wondering in the background, maybe it's China.
Very good. And it seems that Trump, you can correlate a lot of the domestic issues back in the US to his foreign policy. It's almost a distraction sometimes. For example, when Kushner didn't get his security clearance, something else would happen. So he's kind of keeping a lot of dishes spinning all at once, and so it's sometimes difficult to separate the domestic issues from what he's doing in the international realm to get it, to move the lenses to put the attention somewhere else. Do you think this might correlate to what's happening with the Mueller?
I'm a little bit worried that he might be too desperate for a success. I mean, this is a situation that is a big, big opportunity for Trump, but also a big risk. The risk is that he's really personalized the summit. And so if it fails, it doesn't happen, or it becomes a real kind of angry set-off, it's going to be a setback not just for his personal credibility, but for that United States. It could generate perception. This is another demonstration of the disruptive character that Trump brings to international relations. Such an outcome actually could increase a propensity for this confrontation to have a dangerous escalational dynamic, increase the prospects of conflict. If it's success, it's going to be a big success because it will disrupt Trump's image as a disruptor. It will demonstrate what he's been trying to prove, that he can make the deal, there'll be something constructive and will benefit peace.
Do you think that the meeting will take place in Singapore on June 12th?
My instinct is yes, because I don't see a downside for the North Korean side in failure. They just go back to status quo.
And I've never seen Trump have a more warm or happy smile on his face when people said, no, Bell, no, Bell. He had a huge smile. I think it would be odd if he did even win that, but he seems to be very motivated by that. Isn't this kind of a dangerous situation? Because it could be a trap for himself, that the others know he's so desperate to make a good deal and maybe win the Nobel Peace Prize. This is it's kind of putting him in a not very good negotiating position.
As I tried to say, he's created a dynamic where if he fails, this could be not just a setback for himself, but it could be a significant setback for U.S. influence in the region, and it could increase the risk of war. But if he wins, I think it would be hard to argue why shouldn't he get a Nobel Prize. If in fact he's able to deliver the denuclearization of North Korea in a way that enhances, and that's a big in a way, but in a way that enhances regional security, I couldn't even argue against giving him a Nobel Prize.
Excellent. Thank you for your comments. Now let's turn to China. Tong, how does North Korea feel it already in your mind, in your view, does North Korea feel it already has a credible nuclear deterrent?
I think so. And I think that's why North Korea started to change its policy 180 degrees. North Korea, I think, already had the capability to miniaturize a nuclear warhead. Right? The fact that North Korea started with the fission bomb and then moved on to building a hydrogen bomb means North Korea felt confident that its fission bomb design is okay. So at least North Korea has a miniaturized fission bomb design capability. And in terms of the delivery system, North Korea had 3 successful ICBM tests last year. It's true that some of the technologies are not fully demonstrated, especially there is debate about whether North Korea's re-entry vehicle for the ICBM fully work. But the issue is maybe the North Koreans themselves don't know because North Korean did not have the capability to receive the telemetry from the descending warhead anyway. But the key point is it doesn't matter because from the American perspective, the US wouldn't be able to fully rule out the possibility that the ICBM, including the re-entry vehicle, might work if really used. And as a result, the United States would have to treat that as a real and serious threat. That uncertainty already creates a credible deterrent for the North Koreans. So I think it's North Koreans that they already acquired a basic, rudimentary, but credible nuclear deterrent capability by the end of 2017 that made them capable to make a policy change because their security objective was already met. Now they are moving to achieve the second objective, which is to retain their core nuclear deterrent capability, and on that basis, to try to build a normal and stable relationship with the outside world. The goal at this moment for North Korea is to focus on its economic development, to pivot to economy. So I think indeed North Koreans felt confident already about their nuclear deterrent.
So if they feel so confident about their nuclear deterrent, what kind of concessions do you think North Korea can make during the summit meeting, if any?
So I think the North Korean bottom line is to keep its core nuclear deterrent. And they have to keep a readily usable nuclear deterrent capability in order to deter the US from ever attempting a preemptive disarming strike. They have to keep certain part of their nuclear warheads, their ICBMs, ready for use at any moment. Therefore, I don't see North Korea has any plan to give up its core nuclear capability, the ICBMs, the warheads, etc. It wouldn't even reveal the exact numbers or locations for those capabilities. That would only increase the US capability to preemptively destroy those capabilities. I do think North Korea might be willing to offer a few but limited nuclear concessions. One is North Korea is willing to make a high-level political commitment to the eventual goal of denuclearization, which North Korea has already made during the Inter-Korean Summit meeting. Second, North Korea is waiting, I think, to take measures in the direction of freezing its nuclear capabilities. Remember, the goal of North Korea at this moment is to make the international community accept its nuclear reality. So it does not have any incentive to further enhance that capability, because by doing that, it would only make it harder for the international community to accept its ever-growing capabilities. So North Korea, I think, has already declared measures to suspend the nuclear tests, missile tests, to shut down the nuclear test site. All those efforts are in the direction of freezing its capabilities. Third, I think North Korea might be willing to discuss measures to give up some non-essential capabilities. Some of North Korea's programs, such as the SLBM program, the submarine-launched ballistic missile program, doesn't make much military sense. North Korea's submarines are not survivable at all, especially facing the very advanced ASW anti-submarine warfare capabilities of the United States, Japan, and South Korea. So it would require North Korea to continue investing a lot of money into that program to make it effective. So I think if we put real pressure on North Korea, we may be able to force North Korea to give up those non-essential capabilities. Lastly, I think North Korea is willing to offer measures to substantiate its non-proliferation commitment. We may be able to make North Korea abide by the MTCR, for example, the Missile Technology Control Regime. We might be able to convince North Korea to set up a domestic export control system to make sure that it would not transport sensitive nuclear and missile technologies, materials, weapons to a third player, and making its practice fully transparent.
Thank you for your expertise in that area. Let's turn to Koichi Ai from Japan. Japan is watching this very carefully because they're actually in the range of North Korean missiles, and they're very concerned about this. How do you interpret what is going on, and what does Japan make of the recent moves? Because there's been kind of some short-circuiting. I mean, South Korea has been talking to Trump. Abe is trying to cultivate a very careful relationship with Trump. So the Japanese tend to see three things: the wedge strategy, time buying, because we've seen this before. It's deja vu. We've been through this 3 times before. And what do you think Japan can contribute to the negotiation process?
Thank you, Teresa. Obviously, Japan is very much a stakeholder in this whole episode. I do not need perhaps to remind our audience that in the past years, DPRK has launched a number of test missiles which flew over Japanese island chain. So even the general public is aware of the threat posed by the capability that DPRK has come to possess. So we are very much a stakeholder in this whole episode, and that's why our Prime Minister has been in very close contact with President Trump, as well as a very recent meeting in Tokyo with both Chinese and South Korean leaders. In all of these meetings and discussions, this question of how to bring about denuclearization of Korean Peninsula was very top of the list of their agendas. So we are involved, and we are very much concerned about how this discussion between President Trump and Kim Jong-un turns out. I'm cautiously optimistic about this, but obviously I have to hedge it with certain words of caution. And first thing I would like to emphasize is that we all need to stay focused on what is the core purpose and objective of this negotiation. North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile programs are the most imminent threat to the regional security in our part of the world, and complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantling of this nuclear capability is the bottom line that we need to achieve through this process. Many things have happened in the recent weeks and even days that we are dazed by what's happening in front of us, but the core objective needs to be emphasized, that this is dismantling of the nuclear capability in a way that is complete, verifiable, and irreversible. We need to be focused on that. Second cautionary comment is that we need perhaps to manage expectations from this summit meeting. So as not to be misunderstood, managing expectation means we need to be ready to accept compromise. It's a completely opposite of that. No deal is better than a bad deal in this situation. We don't want any compromise from this negotiation that does not meet the first objective that I mentioned. This point is very easy to forget because people have been conditioned to take this historic event, and I give you that this is a historic event, first meeting between the President of the United States and North Korean leader. The fact that they're meeting at all seemed to excite people and raise great expectations of a result coming out of this meeting. But we have to manage expectation that if the deal or the agreement does not meet the standard that we seek, maybe they should leave Singapore without any agreement. I would think that even if they leave Singapore with no agreement in hand, it's not the end of the world. They could always come back and renegotiate, wait a while, and seek another chance. I don't think it's wise to seek result at the cost of making unwise compromise. So that would be the second cautionary word. And the last point is we should not lose sight of who we are dealing with. Yes, as was earlier suggested, our North Korean leader is a very acute manipulator of images, and to go from brother assassinating, uncle killing leader to the friend of South Korean people is too much for me to swallow. But I can see that he's played his card very well in this regard. But from where we look at it, I don't think not much has changed in North Korea. I don't think much has changed in the regime, or I don't think much has changed in the person himself. So we have to make sure that we keep reminding ourselves who these people are, who he is. Well, maybe this is the only opportunity to mention this, so I will elaborate on that from uniquely Japanese perspective. We do have this standing issue between Japan and North Korea called abduction issue. For those of you who are not familiar, the 17 of the Japanese citizens were abducted while they were on Japanese soil in 1970s until perhaps early 1980s by special operating coup from North Korea. And their whereabouts were not clear until early 2000s. And when Prime Minister Koizumi first visited Pyongyang, as the first prime minister to do so, he had a meeting with Kim Jong-il, the father of the Kim Jong-un. And in that meeting, Kim Jong-il admitted that his country had indeed abducted more than a dozen Japanese citizens. And that led to the return of 5 Japanese citizens, former abductees, to Japan 1 month later. But we still don't know whereabouts of the 12 remaining Japanese citizens. This is outstanding issue between Japan and North Korea, and we have not seen any sincere approach to this question from North Korean side. We believe this to be extremely important humanitarian issue, and this is one of the examples of how we are very much cautious about the person and the regime, which it remains. So those are 3 cautionary points that I would emphasize in observing the development in the near future. Thank you.
Excellent points, and that's something that seems to be neglected in all of this is the humanitarian aspects. It's not even getting much airwave, except the 3 men who were the hostages that were released. I think Kim Jong-un is the Madonna of dictators. Yeah, he's always reinventing himself, and I guess he'll be doing that over the years. But I think you also made a very salient point about managing expectations. In South Korea, there's a film studio where they recreated the border, and it's so popular, and everyone goes and poses with their boyfriend or girlfriend or children, you know, shaking their hands. So it's like everyone is just so excited. So it's like peace is, you know, this idea is breaking out all over. And as Ian pointed out, the incredible increase in positive reactions to the North. But I think don't break out the champagne yet, and there definitely needs to be, it's going to be a long, long, hard road ahead. So let's move on to Alexei. What is happening with Russia? So we've seen, I like to call it from Russia with bandwidth. We are always wondering about Russia-China relations, and recently, several months ago, Russia installed a new cable for North Korea, which in my mind reflected that the North didn't trust China so much, that they wanted to diversify, and Russia helped them out with that. But we've also seen cooperation. Russia and China, it was unprecedented, and it's actually quite positive. We saw 2 rounds of unanimous Security Council resolutions that Russia and China agreed to board suspect ships. And so this was a huge diplomatic achievement. So maybe you want to talk about how this is working out.
Thank you. Well, I have to say we are deeply worried about the development of the situation North Korean Peninsula, because it borders Russia. We have several hundred kilometers of common border. So if there is a major military conflict, then we will feel the consequences of this conflict. So we are very, very much interested in having this situation under control, and eventually to have this situation solved. Of course, you know, this goal of complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization seems to me, how to put it, a distant goal. I don't think we can realistically expect that it will happen overnight, but it's a good goal. I would say that's something worth fighting for. Now, we have put forward together with the Chinese in 2017 the so-called roadmap. And the course of events since that time more or less corresponds to this roadmap. This roadmap consists of 3 elements. The first element is the limitation of military activities on the North Korean Peninsula. And actually, there are some progresses there because North Korea has stopped the nuclear tests. Well, I think they have had enough, so they don't need any more. Now they are closing this nuclear underground, the testing site. The testing site, I think they had some problems with it, serious problems with it, so they're closing it anyway. But they are selling it as a very big move towards international peace, and of course, well, that's a wise thing to do. I think the North Koreans are monitoring very closely the activities in South Korea, and they are very nervous about new military exercises conducted by the United States and South Korea. Recently, they have canceled a meeting in Panmunjom on a pretty high level, which had to take place because of new military exercises in the south. And so I think that it would be probably wise to suspend this kind of military exercises or the announcement of new military exercises before the meeting in Singapore, because well, I don't think it will kill the meeting, but it may jeopardize this meeting. The North Koreans are very, very nervous about new military exercises, and they want to be heard. They want to be heard about that. It's not that they just, they're making statements. So not to endanger the meeting. I think that would be wise not to engage in those military exercises. The second part of the roadmap are direct negotiations between the two Koreas. They have happened already and they hopefully will be going on. And direct negotiations with the United States with a possibility to sign a peace treaty, to have some public guarantees for the North Koreans that the United States will not engage in regime change efforts towards North Korea, and even, why not, eventually to have a restoration not restoration because they didn't exist at all, but instauration of diplomatic relations between North Korea and the United States. So I wouldn't say it's completely unfeasible. And finally, the third element of the roadmap, it's the beginning of general negotiations about the whole complex of security issues on the Korean Peninsula. And that's where Russia thinks that it can step in. So basically, we are satisfied with the direction of the development, but we are slightly worried about first excessive expectation from the Singapore meeting that may be generated by some statements of Donald Trump. Then we think that sometimes we hear from the United States, that there will be a kind of take it or leave it approach. As somebody depicted to me the approach by John Bolton, I don't know whether it's true or not, but it seems that the approach is we come to Singapore, we look at Kim, the North Korean leader, and we say yes or no. If he says no, we go away, and that's over. I don't know whether it's the right description of the American position. I hope it's not. But the recent demand, which was voiced by the American side, that the United States expect North Koreans in 6 months' time to get all the nuclear devices from North Korea and under international control, well, I think it's absolutely not realistic. I can accept this as a bargaining position, as a start for negotiations, which I think it is. But to expect that it will happen, it will not happen. And I completely agree with you, it will not happen. And also, I think that we should be very careful with the models, because if John Bolton says that there is a Libyan model, I wonder what he has in mind. If he has in mind that the country will be bombed out after it gets rid of all the weapons of mass destruction, I wonder what was in Bolton's mind when he said that. Was it a desire to threaten the North Koreans? Because that's a threat. The Libyan model is a threat, basically. Or he's just forgotten what happened to Libya. So I don't think he has forgotten. Okay. I think he knows.
Well, I think there's two things there, because there's the 2003 example of.
Yes.
And then there's a difference between 2003 and 2011. So
well, I think
we shouldn't forget about that. And I have to push back about Pompeo, because Pompeo had a meeting with Kim Jong-un, and it was agreed that they would have these military exercises. Now, if Kim Jong-un is backsliding, that might be a good sign of that the future might not look so bright if he's already backtracking on things that they agreed on.
Exactly, that's what I'm talking about.
And the other issue is that I think we should remember that this logjam had happened for quite a long time, because the demand was that they would have to denuclearize, and the US would not meet with the North Korean leader. And every administration has said the same thing. And so this has been a constant problem. So Trump, in his own Trumpian fashion, cut through the Gordian knot and said, I will meet with you. But now they're kind of like changing the deck chairs around, they're moving around. So I think in his mind, he thinks he's, given them, he's kind of broken through, Chinese agreed to meet with them, and now they're changing everything. So I think that people should keep in mind that he's the first president ever to agree to meet with them, and now they're trying to parlay that or leverage that into something else. So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
We are keeping that in mind. That's why we say we are basically satisfied with the development. But I'm talking about the threats, and the worries which. And then you say that there is a difference in Libya between 2003 and 2011. I think that what happened in 2011 was the result of 2003. If Gaddafi did not get rid of his weapons of mass destruction, I think that maybe, and that's a bad lesson, by the way, and bad deduction, but that shows that Libya may have ended in a different way, the Libyan story.
We could think of a few examples. Iraq.
Iran.
Ukraine.
The Iranian deal is a good example.
Ukraine might be a very salient one right here. So I have a question, though, because now we see Russia investing off the coast of Vietnam. It's almost like China is distracted with what's going on with North Korea, and Russia's kind of causing problems in what China would prefer to think of their region. So we've seen this interesting development, and it's kind of like taken straight out of the Chinese playbook. So the Russians now are investing in a field, Rosneft is investing in a field off of Vietnam. I know this is straying a little bit from the narrative, but it's kind of questioning about the Russia-China relationship.
No. Look, I want to tell you one thing, that whatever potential differences there may be between Moscow and Beijing, first, I don't see any serious major difference on international issues. That's the first thing. The second thing is that Russia and China were very close on a number of issues of importance, of high importance, like Syria, like the Iranian deal, like North Korea, and you were right to point out that we voted together for those resolutions in the Security Council. And finally, you see, the Obama administration and the Trump administration are doing everything possible in their forces to push Russia and China in a mutual embrace. I mean, sometimes I wonder why they are doing the United States in this way. Because I remember that Henry Kissinger once told me that we should never have a quarrel with Moscow and Beijing simultaneously. Either we quarrel with the Chinese, either we quarrel with the Russians, but we should not do that. Now, the two last administrations of the United States, they have parted with this Kissingerian principle, which I think is a very risky story. So when you say that Russia is doing something in Vietnam and what the Chinese think about, in the global strategy, Russia and China feel very close together, and one of the reasons of this is the Chinese understand very well that if Russia had come under a very strong pressure recently, for a number of reasons, from the United States and the Western alliance, China may be next. And this is what actually makes Russia and the Chinese today very strong strategic partners. So, small, even I'm not sure about Vietnam, that you're right, that there are big differences, but even if there are small things, they do not count in this strategic calculus between Moscow and Beijing.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's move on to Gudrun with the European perspective. So everyone thinks it's Asia, but actually Europe is far closer to North Korea's missiles than either Washington, D.C. or the west coast of the United States. In fact, the closest city in NATO member would be Tallinn. So the Estonians are like, oh no, not us again. But in reality, it is much closer for Europe. So it's not a direct threat to Europe, but there could be an accident. So this is something that maybe Europe should take into mind. So are there things Europe can do to help in the negotiations? Europe also has FTAs in the region. So they have economic interests in this region. So if something does happen there, it will affect European economies. So what can Europe contribute? And today in the Global Times, which is kind of a right-wing hawkish newspaper in Japan, it said that joint efforts on China-EU needed to fight unilateralism. So you talked earlier about Russia-China. Well, the US seems to be pushing EU into China's arms right now with this kind of not very helpful transatlantic narrative. So the Chinese are playing up on this as much as possible. So do you think that this is also a wedge issue, a possible wedge issue for Europe? Thanks, Gudrun.
The Global Times is a Chinese newspaper, not a Japanese newspaper.
Did I say Japanese? Oh my gosh,
that's
a Freudian slip.
I just wanted to clarify that. I want to say something else first. If you look at the statements we have heard so far, we already see that there is no reason for optimism. because there are so many different expectations on different sides. There are different understandings. For example, the word denuclearization means something completely different for the US and for North Korea. The idea that North Korea is handing over the key to the installations or shipping out something is simply unrealistic. And so the question really is, what would be a win for Donald Trump under the condition that what Tung said is correct, that North Korea is not willing to give up its life guarantee, so to speak. And I think this is how they see it, that this is their survival guarantee. So what would be a win? I think in the region there is a lot of concern that there would be something like an America First deal, if you will, where only American interests are addressed, and this would mean a deal where only the ICBMs and maybe the question of horizontal proliferation are addressed, and the region, South Korea and Japan, are left out in the cold. So this would not address the security interests of South Korea, maybe even not China, and of Japan. And I want to pick up this Libya thing because I think we have so many examples in the last years. India, Pakistan, outside the NPT, but sort of India now accepted as a nuclear weapon state. I think this is really what North Korea aspires, this sort of position. And the Libya example, the Iraq example, and the pull out of the United States of the Iran deal, I don't know what I would make of that if I'm Kim Jong-un. It would certainly not raise my trust in the US. Maybe it's to really set the scene, this pulling out of the Iran deal, if there is a strategy on the US side, to set the scene in the sense that if it's not a good deal, there will be no deal, just like in the case of Iran. But on the other hand, there is an agreement and the US pulls out, could also give the message you cannot trust even if you have a deal with the United States. So I think here we already see how expectation management and an increase of understanding, are we talking about the same things, would be very important. Also, there is a different interpretation why Kim Jong-un is now coming to the negotiation table. We have heard about the double freeze suggestion from China and Russia, and probably both countries would say this is part of what brought Kim Jong-un back to the negotiation table, while the US is convinced that maximum pressure worked. There is also different understandings of sanctions. China wants to use sanctions to bring North Korea back to the table, but not completely destroy or cripple them. The US really uses sanctions to punish in a way. So there are all sorts of different understandings in the room. I say all this because there is not much to say about the Europeans, I assume. The role is marginal at best. I mean, what we did was we supported the sanctions, which was not, and we implemented the sanctions, and the implementation was actually not that easy in Europe because several member states have very specific problems. In Poland, for example, there were North Korean workers, so this had to be dealt with. Germany had its own problem with the hostel that is sort of run by the North Koreans, and the money they make is actually hard currency that goes to North Korea, so the Germans had to find a way how to address this hostel issue. So this is what we did. There were also some efforts, for example, by the Swedish government or a Swedish institution to invite the experts in a 1.5 track format, including from North Korea, to talk about things on neutral ground, so to speak. I think this is also why there was some speculation whether the meeting, the summit could actually take place in Europe, but the problem is that Kim Jong-un's plane cannot fly very far. there would have been a solution for that, but now it's Singapore, and I think it's good because the security and everything is in place there. I think the European concern is not about an attack by North Korea or about an incident. The main concern is the non-proliferation regime and the future of the NPT. And I think that this is very much the core interest of the Europeans. At least I'm not aware that the media or the publics are discussing the possibility of being attacked by North Korea. I mean, we have some embassies there, and actually it's the European Union or some of the European member states who also keep some of the channels open. I think Sweden even has does the consulary work for the United States, for example. So I think we'll see more as the neutral ones. Where we will have a role is probably if there should be a deal, which I don't believe, but the European Union was a member of CEDAW after the Framework Agreement 1994. So if there is some sort of solution and deal, the Europeans will probably come in on that and try to help to make it work.
Okay. The sun is kind of going down and the light is coming into my eyes. So I saw Ambassador Vrishbo's and Bobo Lo's hands. We have a lot of smart people in the classroom, in the room. Excuse me, sorry. I apologize for that. And we want to make sure you all have some questions. So, and have plenty of time for discussion. So please.
Thanks very much, Teresa. Thanks to the panel. Very good presentations by everyone. I've been concerned about this summit meeting since it was first announced because of concern out of the lack of preparation, and I'm even more concerned about that the closer that the date comes. And particularly the statement attributed to President Trump that he doesn't need to prepare for this meeting. You know, he knows everything there is to know. He's the deal maker. So this, and because there are indeed, as many of the speakers have said, very divergent definitions of denuclearization. There's a risk of a train wreck at this summit meeting if they come in with conflicting expectations. It's a disaster. There's no agreement. President Trump says, I've been played. This is not serious. And we get back on the track towards military action, which is what nobody wants. So we need to kind of clarify each other's intentions to see whether there is a deal to be had. I would argue to not commit to the date already set if there's not. And I think this week's setback and what seems to be a reversion to the old playbook by Kim Jong-un and his regime may be a helpful wake-up call that we do need to prepare before we go into this room without any certainty of the outcome. I think it's clear Tong Zhao laid out very eloquently what is Kim Jong-un's going-in position, that he wants to be recognized as a nuclear state. He'll agree to denuclearization only in a very distant time horizon. He wants lots of rewards up front. He wants a long period of peaceful coexistence, both with the US and with the South, before he begins to give up his nuclear weapons. This might lead to what those of us in this room might consider to be a good enough outcome, a freeze on any further testing, which would at least cap the threat, if not remove it. But I don't think that's going to be good enough for the Trump administration. They repeatedly say they're not going to repeat the mistakes of past administrations, which have led to these agreements on a gradual approach, which end up being violated by the North and have collapsed. So I think they do want CVID in a relatively rapid time frame, not overnight. Talking about the Libya model, even just the 2003 part of it, is not helpful, and obviously got the North Koreans back up. But I think they are talking about perhaps 12 to 18 months. They are talking about some early steps which would require kind of real down payments on disarmament, including the dismantlement of ICBMs or the removal of them from the country and the removal of some warheads from the country, so that Kim Jong-un would have to prove that this time it's different, that he's not playing the same old games. And is such a deal possible? The South Koreans think it is, that the North Koreans are terrified by the military threats last year, that the sanctions are going to ultimately hurt them, and that Kim Jong-un wants to live a long life as ruler of his country and will trade the nukes for economic development. but that's still hard to believe. I think the analysis we've heard from the panel is more likely. So I come back to this train wreck scenario, and I wonder if even this 18-month scenario in anyone's, of the speaker's views, do you see this 18-month scenario as possible, or do you think even that is too ambitious? In which case, maybe we should call the whole thing off.
I'm going to group some so that we can pick it up. That's a great question because it does look very frightening. And in normal negotiations, it starts at a low level, and then you finally work it up to the top, and people sign the agreement. But this is kind of the opposite, and there's just too many accidents waiting to happen. Bobolo.
Thanks very much. I don't know whether to be optimistic or not, but I just wanted to pick up a couple of points that people had made. Koichi, you said no deal is better than a bad deal, and fundamentally I agree. But I also wonder, what is a bad deal and a good deal? There's a difference between a good deal for America, a good deal for the Trump administration, and a good deal for Trump. And I think the distinction is an important one, because if Trump feels that a good deal is one that I can sell and that is one that will get me that Nobel Peace Prize, he's going to say, to hell with the detail. Now, and this brings me to Tong Zhao's excellent points. Let's say that the deal the North Koreans offer Trump, it has a commitment to eventual total denuclearization, freezing nuclear capabilities, giving up on some redundant nuclear capabilities, and a North Korea joining the MTCER, and you give that to Trump, then Trump thinks, well, that's a reasonable deal for me. I look good. I've managed to get far more than any previous US administration. I'm a happy bunny. And so on the denuclearization, I accept, of course, there are very different interpretations of what that means. But in a sense, a lot of agreements and international agreements are about a certain suspension of disbelief, are about a certain creative ambiguity. And I wonder, therefore, just to be an Australian with a naturally sunny disposition, whether that might, just might, form the basis of a deal between Trump and Kim, not necessarily, one that many people in the United States would be most unhappy about, many people in the Trump administration will be unhappy about, but crucially, the one guy to be really happy about it could be Trump himself. So I just wonder.
Okay, very good. And could you please identify yourself? I know you're from IISS, and let's keep it short and sharp. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Nigel Inkster. I find it
Nigel.
Richly amusing that John Bolton should hold up the Libyan example as an exemplar, given what I know to have been his intense resistance to that deal when we did it. But there you go, what goes around. My question, I'm a Brexit Brit, so I don't do sunny. But the only thing sunny at the moment is I'm not in the UK for the royal wedding. But let's assume that some sort of deal is struck in Singapore that is just about good enough to enable all sides to declare victory, and we get into a situation where some strategic pause takes place. North Korea starts to get some economic benefits. There is a general sense of détente. How long before Kim Jong-un then turns his attention to reunification of the Korean Peninsula on his terms? And there are a long litany of examples. I'm not going to go through them because it would take all day. But what guarantees could interested parties, and inevitably I turn to China in this regard, does China have either the inclination or the ability to offer any guarantees in respect of North Korea's behavior in this regard?
Excellent. I'm going to abuse my role as moderator and just add a little question onto that. My professor, Bruce Cummings, taught us that the uncomfortable truth about all of this is that everyone liked the situation just the way it was, with North Korea as a buffer state. And China was happy to have it as a buffer state. So maybe let's keep that in mind. And we have grouped three big interventions together. So I'll start with you, Ian, then just work our way down the panel. And pick and choose which ones you want to answer.
On a good deal for Trump, I mean, he set himself up where he has to match the JCPOA in terms of intrusiveness, in terms of completeness. So he set himself a pretty high standard. My fear is not so much what he's going to be focusing on in terms of denuclearization, but it's how he's going to be affecting the breadth of this arrangement that will come out of Singapore. To what degree will he protect the interests of our allies? To what degree will he reaffirm the U.S. security posture in the region and sustain it? It's possible you could see he could walk away. He, as president, might be happy with just something that just eliminates the ICBMs and the nukes. But I'm not sure that would resonate really well with our allies over there. I'm pretty confident that his cabinet wouldn't be satisfied with that. But, you know, Trump is a little bit more self-assertive now. A year ago, he certainly would have respected his cabinet. Now, he's more willing to drive things on his cabinet.
Ian, do you think he cares about his allies?
I think his foreign policy is driven first and foremost by his base. We haven't had a foreign policy so driven by domestic politics, at least that I can think of. Certainly in the post-Cold War era. I don't want to go so far as say he doesn't care about our allies. I mean, we just had a big discussion this afternoon with people saying he's dismissing Europe. But look, he's putting a lot of forces into Europe. So he certainly cares about Europe in some respects. He's spending a lot of money, defense budget dollars, on Europe. So he cares about some allies. But I do get worried about, as Sandy says, this lack of preparation, which can allow a president of this nature to make a quick decision that doesn't fully take into account our broader interests and the interests of our allies.
Ian pretty much covered my portion of the answer, but I did deliberately commit omission in elaborating what constituted, in my mind, a bad deal would be. Between you and Ian, you've answered the question. So, thank you.
Thanks for keeping it short and sharp.
Well, talking about good deals, you know what a good deal for Trump would be with Iran? He stated recently that Iran should drop its subversive activities in the region. He should stop to support Al-Qaeda, which Iran never did, support international terrorism, give rid of his missiles, give rid of the remnants of his nuclear program, and 5 positions more, something to which Iran will never agree. So if he wants a good deal of this type with North Korea, which will fulfill 100% of American demands, which even have nothing to do with the nuclear capabilities of North Korea, then definitely he will not get such a deal. It's absolutely evident. Now, if Trump wants to, well, I would say even if he displays some capacities to be wise, which is not his strong point, but if he does that, he may present this Singapore meeting as the end of a threat of war on North Korea, on the Korean Peninsula. And I think this is much more than Obama did when he got the Nobel Prize. Because at that point, Obama got the Nobel Prize just for words, for promises, for intentions, for statements and declarations. And here, if it is a start of a peace process, then I think that would be already a good deal. Well, from our point of view, for sure.
Okay. Sure, please.
If you're worried about the breadth of this agreement, one thing to think about that might be in the minds of Trump is that, you know, if I eliminate the nuclear threat and just the ICBMs and not the medium-range missiles and that sort of thing, I'm still committed to security of South Korea. I'll still have tens of thousands of troops over there. I'll have nuclear weapons. My word is good, so why should my allies be worried? That's one thing that kind of concerns me.
Okay, let me say something about the allies from a German perspective or as a member in NATO. I think the perception here is that the approach to the alliances is just as transactional as to everything else. I mean, we saw in the very early days of the Trump administration the pressure on Japan and on Korea to pay more for their own defense. So it's sort of, it's another deal. It's sort of a business. It's not, you know, the usual things you cite when you praise the alliances were absent. And I mean, in NATO, there was the situation when he did not commit to Article 5. Later he did, but I mean, people stand there and they're wondering, and it's enough to create this kind of, well, you know, a president who says you can rely on one thing, and that's that I will be unpredictable. I'm sorry, but it's just not really creating a lot of trust. And this is the problem, I think, for the region, and well, probably for us Europeans less so, but I think in the region it's a big issue. The Japan passing, the Korea passing, China being cut out. I mean, these debates are taking place in Asia.
And just before you speak, it's hard to see, so if you have a question, just wave your arm a lot. Okay, and I'll pick you up then, thanks. Okay, please, Tong, sorry.
The gentleman mentioned about the issue of down payment. I do believe North Korea promised a down payment to show some upfront demonstration of goodwill. But I think the issue is there is major disagreement or major misunderstanding between North Korea and United States about what the down payment means. For the North Koreans, I think their promise to suspend nuclear tests, missile tests, shutting down the nuclear test site, and even indicating they might be interested in signing the CTBT is their down payment. But for the United States, the down payment means North Korea providing a number of nuclear warheads and ICBMs to the United States. And that sounds outrageous to the North Koreans, and that's why they, quickly changed their tone recently, threatening to withdraw from the summit. Even if the summit meeting failed, we talk about the risk of train wreck. Actually, I don't see a major risk because the outcome is already set. North Korea has already secured a soft landing. The smartest move by the North Korean leader is to come to China twice and quickly repair ties with China before he meets with Trump. And North Korea has been very successful in building a very positive international image. Now North Korea is the responsible and reasonable player, promising to stop all provocations, taking substantive measures to shut down the nuclear test site, willing to engage with the outside world, willing to pivot and focus on economic development, committing to diplomacy for resolving the differences. Even if the summit meeting failed, what can the United States do? Can the U.S. resort to a military strike? At this moment, given the very positive international image of North Korea, would U.S. be able to convince China and Russia to agree to another UN Security Council resolution to impose additional sanctions on North Korea? There's zero chance. So American maximum pressure campaign has already reached its maximum level. My personal assessment is under current sanctions, the North Korean economy would not face an imminent crisis. Again, North Korea has secured a soft landing already. And I think maybe China already recognized that. And China recognized that near-term denuclearization is basically impossible. But I think China sees a bigger picture opportunity. which is after acquiring a nuclear deterrent, after acquiring a basic sense of security, North Korea is now much more capable of starting a strategic transition to become a more normal country, a richer country, a country that is connected economically with the outside world. And from the Chinese perspective, the fundamental security dilemma underlining the North Korean nuclear crisis is the paranoia of North Korea, is North Korea's deep distrust towards the outside world. And the reason for that is North Korea has been isolated for too long. North Korea genuinely doesn't trust the outside world. So the only way to resolve the root cause of that is to help North Korea transform into a normal country. And I think China, even if North Korea doesn't achieve immediate denuclearization, would be more than happy to help facilitate this process. You talked about EU not really concerned about North Korean missile striking EU because EU has North Korean embassies. Right? So if North Korea starts to build connections with the outside world, if North Korean leaders, like the Chinese leaders, start to send their sons and daughters to the US, to the European countries to study, that's the best way to deter North Korea from ever launching a missile strike against those countries. Last small point, you talk about how should we do once North Korea wanting to use nuclear coercion to achieve reunification. I think it has been, a general point is it has been examined by scholars, and the result was nuclear coercion is much more difficult to achieve than nuclear deterrent. In other words, it's very difficult to use nuclear weapons to change the status quo. A second point is what China could do if North Korea indeed shows a sign of wanting to use nuclear coercion to achieve reunification. I think that would really alert China, because that shows North Korea has expansionist intentions. And don't forget, there is still border dispute between North Korea and China. And if China starts to believe that North Korea is becoming an expansionist country, I think China will mobilize all its resources and work closely with other countries to prevent North Korea from advancing. Thanks.
Thank you. I wonder what historians will say about Donald Trump's art of the deal. It turned into the art of the cave, maybe, and maybe they won't get the Nobel Prize, but maybe Kim Jong-un will get the Oscar for great acting. So I saw some hands. Can you wave them around again? Okay. And please identify yourself. And now we're coming to the last bit, so if there's a specific person, and keep it short and sharp, please.
Thank you. Adel Neumann from the Institute for Security Policy at the University of Kiel in Germany. Thank you very much for the so far really interesting talk. There's one thing that I'm missing currently. I think we have a strong antagonism between the United States and North Korea. And the position of South Korea, to me, at the moment, is still missing. Because I understand we have a new government now in South Korea, which also has an own agenda, which is more open to North Korea, and they're also invested in this. And they were the ones who brought the message, hey, Donald Trump, United States, North Korea is ready to go this step. So the first person who will lose the face is actually South Korea. So I think I would be interested in your opinion, how you see, what kind of role this will play. Then a very quick comment, Mr. Pushkov. I really want to support the point that, of course, the West is pushing Russia and China together. And I want to remind everybody, China is still under weapons embargo since 1989 after Tiananmen, which is still ongoing. So we'll probably not be friends. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay. I'm going to group them together. Yes, sir?
David Thompson, C4ADS. I want to thank you all for a great panel. My question is for Mr. Tong. If it's your estimate that during negotiations, North Korea would refuse to give up its nuclear capabilities, what do you think they could reasonably expect in return in terms of sanctions relief?
Okay, Jalal?
Hi, Dinajar from Indonesia. As you may know, I told you earlier that I just came back from DPRK, and my impression, and you're very right, Ian, is that Kim Jong-un has full ownership of the Inter-Korean Summit. And when I was there, all the officials said that this is a process that we started, right? And when I was in Seoul about 2 weeks after, former Foreign Minister Song Ju-han said that even the people from President Moon's office say that this is a process that was started by Kim Jong-un. What am I saying this? So long as they feel that they own this process, then we're in a good place. And I think the trick for this Inter-Korean Summit and Trump-Kim Jong-un meeting to succeed is to keep making Kim Jong-un feel that he owns this process and avoid him from feeling defensive or forced into the situation in any way. But I feel that the psychology needs to be maintained in order to preserve the positive attitude and mindset of this process.
Okay, I think I can take in one more question. Okay.
Emilio Perez from the Spanish Atlantic Association. Quick comment regarding President Trump's what he does and what he does regarding with its allies. I have the perception that he's an American citizen, and as such, he's only reflecting what the many American citizens feel. And this is the concept of burden sharing. He has allies, and he expects the allies to commit to the 2% expenditure on defense of GDP. And this is not happening. And is related to the other concept of free riders. There is the feeling in the US that a lot of European countries are free riders. And I think that he's only expressing those issues, and at the same time, he's putting soldiers, and at the same time, he's increasing expenditure. So I don't think that the two things are, I think it's understood that those things correlate. You know, on the one hand, he's expressing that there should be more expenditure, but on the other hand, he is not forgetting about his allies. I have a question for Mr. Tong. What would be, from a China's perspective, the cooperation with the US for this deal to happen?
Okay, let's see. How about just one, if there's one more, and then I'm going to close the floor. Okay, this will be the last one. And then you can kind of group your answers and final statements. Because for those of you, there's a 7:30 bus, so we have to keep that in mind.
Hi, I'm Samir Patil from Gateway House, India. In all these peace talks, will the dimension of North Korea's cyber sabotage activities will ever come up? Because that constitutes a whole set of new activity from North Korea in terms of cyber crimes, espionage, and all those things. Will that dimension ever come up in this kind of thing?
See, this is the problem, going top down instead of bottom up, and it's a huge problem. All right. Okay. All right, so why don't we start from this end and then go work our way down to Ian.
The prospect of sanction relief. In the statement of the North Korean vice foreign minister who threatened to withdraw from the summit, he said the North Korean's economic development does not rely on American help. Right? I think, in other words, North Korea can live with the result of a failed summit. North Korea can live with the future in which the US continues its economic sanctions, the UN sanctions continue to exist. As I said, I don't think under existing sanctions, North Korea would face any imminent economic crisis. And over time, North Korea can come up with new ways to evade the sanctions. Other countries, South Korea, China, and Russia, appear more than happy to explore options of enhance their economic and trade cooperation with North Korea in areas that do not directly violate existing UN sanctions. So those countries would help North Korea to improve economy. So North Korea can live with that result. Of course, the hope of North Korea is to go to this meeting and hopefully to persuade Trump to accept a deal that is short of immediate denuclearization and get some American and UN sanctions lifted in the future. The China-US cooperation over North Korea. I think disappointing reality is China doesn't trust North Korea and China doesn't trust the United States. China doesn't trust North Korea because China knows North Korea embraces deep historical grievances towards China. North Korea believes China has betrayed North Korea multiple times in history. And North Korea always wanted to play this role of a strategic balancer in this region to balance against the two major powers, China and United States. And China knows that if conditions are ripe, North Korea would be very happy to establish a good and close relationship with Washington. And China doesn't trust the United States. Both China and the United States see each other as the most important long-term strategic rival in the future. So China has this concern that if a nuclear-capable North Korea is going to be the reality, the US would try to put aside the nuclear dispute and try to establish a good relationship with North Korea, to try to absorb North Korea into the American orbit, to use that to contain and to hedge against a rising China in this region. So the geopolitical considerations start to trump non-proliferation principles. Now the Chinese priority, I think, becomes how to make sure North Korea has a closer relationship with us than with the United States. So I don't see these countries cooperating very closely together in the future.
I'll just make a quick comment. There's the memorial in North Korea of Chinese support, North Korean and Chinese cooperation during the Korean War. And the Chinese get very upset when they see it because they think they should be portrayed more in it. And so Chinese tourists are always complaining to North Koreans about that. So even today we see these huge tensions. I'd make that comment. Go ahead.
I think I only say one sentence, and that's I don't believe that it's the EU arms embargo against China that is driving Russia and China into each other's arms. I think it's mostly irrelevant from the Chinese perspective now. Actually, we also don't keep it very well. So I just want to say this is not a huge factor.
And even in Brussels, they don't even ask about it anymore, the Chinese.
Well, unlike North Korean attitude towards China, they don't have any historic grievances about Russia. So we liberated them actually from the Japanese in 1945, and they still remember that. And the father of the ruling dynasty has come from the Soviet army. Actually, he was major in the Soviet army, and this is part of the legacy. So we feel quite safe with North Korea. We're not that close. We don't have the Chinese influence on North Koreans, but we have pretty, I would say, stable and reasonable relations. Although not a lot of economic ties, which is true. Now it gives us a reasonable position of how to put it, benevolent influence. We don't want to push North Korea too far, but we want to give advices, and they are willing to listen. So I think it may be important. Now, answering your question, I don't see really any expansion of North Korea towards the south. I don't think so. It's like, like fearing that GDR would have tried to reintegrate Western Germany at the end of the 80s. It's just. I don't think it's in their mind. I've been to North Korea, and I didn't sense any hint at this. They feel as a surrounded nation. The South has the Americans on their side, and it's just they feel threatened, and they have been feeling threatened for a very long time. So I don't think they really can be expansionist. Finally, a very important point. I would agree with my Chinese colleague that. Kim he's now in a peace offensive. Even he changes his behavior, tactical maneuvering and so on. He will not risk to stop this peace offensive. He has got already a very powerful support from the South. The South want to prevent war with North Korea. That's the overall reason why the South goes so far in this dialogue. And they are very much relieved by Kim's peace offensive, and they are supporting this peace offensive. I think Kim would like to reap the benefits of the peace offensive and not to go back to a military stance. But what is important, and here we come to the Iranian deal and to Donald Trump, unpredictability, and so on and so on. I'm absolutely sure that when it comes to the guarantees, the North Koreans will not trust the American guarantees, because the American guarantees are not guarantees. So I think they will ask for international guarantees with the participation of the United States, but also of leading powers, China, Russia for sure, and the six who have been actually dealing on an international basis with the Korean issue. And that's at that point, I think Trump should be ready to bring in other countries for these international guarantees. They will not be content just with the guarantees of Washington.
The problem we have is that we tend to have very short memory. And this is not the first time we dealt with North Koreans on the issue of nuclear weapon and nuclear development. And I don't think the solution is to go down the same road and accept to be rewarded differently. I think if we go down the same road, same approach as was suggested by other panels, we will get the same result. And I don't think that's going to be very constructive. I do hope that the President Trump will go to Singapore well prepared, because Kim Jong-un is a third generation. They've been at this business for 3 generations and been honing the art of manipulation and deceit. So I hope President will be very well prepared.
Excuse me, I have just a small remark. You are insisting that Kim is an acute manipulator of images, is I quote you right. But that's much better than he would be a dumb manipulator of images. So I think that he is intelligent, and I think we should take this into account. He is showing himself to be a skillful diplomat. And so there is a potential here.
Well, that's what I'm concerned about.
Okay. All right.
It's hard to follow that up. I guess I just say that listening to my colleagues here, when I think about what's going to happen on June 12th, I would be more comfortable, I'll be less comfortable with a sudden announcement of an agreement, and more comfortable with the announcement of a process that will allow the preparations and details to be driven into an agreement that would emerge in the coming months, if not by the end of the year. That would lead me to be more comfortable that we've really provided for a solution that will ensure that we've minimized the nuclear weapon potential of this country. Because think about it, if it has up to 60 weapons, are we really going to have a regime where we're going to be absolutely sure it has nothing? From a country that has had decades of deceit, they could hide material. It would be very hard for us to find. To come up with a regime that will minimize the risk for that to all of a sudden reemerge as a bomb, it's going to be difficult. We've got broad regional considerations to take into account. And then I would argue also, and here I'll leave it with a question, what are the implications of any agreement for the stability of this regime? Because just because we remove a nuclear threat doesn't mean we remove the threat of war. We had decades where we were on the brink of a massive conventional explosion over there. So we're just picking up a very explosive tip of the iceberg. But there's a lot of conventional capacity over there that will still be in place and could still be as devastatingly dangerous. So this is just the first step in deconfliction.
The mood will be different. Yes. The mood will be different. The whole logic will be different.
I'm a little bit worried, because if you all of a sudden talk about massive amounts of economic aid and security assurances, that's a lot of engagement into what is probably a very, very brittle regime. I tend to believe that dictatorships may be enduring, but they're brittle, particularly in an age where knowledge is flowing around. We're talking about a possibility we're going to be opening up this country, and we don't know what that dynamic will do to the stability of the regime. And when regimes become unstable, they can become quite violent.
And it's a really strange situation that Kim Jong-un finds himself in, because this younger generation, I mean, I was in North Korea, but this younger generation, they don't follow the rules. It's like they grew up during a famine, so you have an authoritarian state where people don't follow the rules. So it's kind of this combustible thing, but I still imagine he can control it, but that would take more time. Just one quick comment. I just want to remind everybody that there's a bus for the people, but let's just wind it up here, because let's not forget about that defector who was shot and then dragged by South Koreans back, and then they patched him up, and they found those incredible parasites in him that they couldn't even identify in South Korea. So the unsung people in this whole group are the North Koreans. I mean, the people are suffering so much, and anything that could improve that. But I think, as our Japanese colleague pointed out, this is, it's deja vu all over again, and we've been down this path. I think it's very important. When I lived in Beijing, and I remember I was in a bike accident, and all these North Koreans were throwing themselves over the wall of the Canadian embassy. I think about 16 threw themselves over the wall. And because I was in the hospital, I could hear the doctor saying, I don't know if I can help them, I don't know. And I was just like listening really carefully, trying to find out what was going on. And after that, every embassy, school, any NGO had to put up giant fences. So Beijing was a place that had to keep out the North Korean refugees. And it was such a tragic sight. And every day when you'd walk down the street, you'd just think, what would happen if a North Korean somehow got himself into my apartment? What would I do? And it was just it's so sad. It's just like, I think people are missing this part of it, but I think it's very, as we've seen the hardened caves, all of this would be so difficult to even verify. So it's a very, very complex issue. And I hope, as everyone has been pointing out, that Donald Trump will go well prepared. The US doesn't even have an ambassador in South Korea yet. So this is a very serious problem. So just to cap it off, this is the beginning of a very long process. We need patience, persistence, and a clear strategy. Managing expectations, as Koichi Ai said. And let's go easy on celebratory champagne. Dennis Rodman has already said he should get the Nobel Prize too. So let's please join me in thanking this excellent panel so thank you very, very much. And just a housekeeping note here, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are invited to the GlobeSec Gala dinner, please note that buses will be leaving shortly. The meeting point is in the lobby downstairs. The program continues tomorrow at 9 a.m. in Danube, space with a session on intelligence, and in Maria Teresa with a debate on AI race. Thank you.